Hey team, welcome back to the third video in the 6-part series around how to set goals that matter personally to you and that move your life in the direction that you actually want to be heading in, and 2, are going to be maximizing your chances of actually achieving those goals, because setting goals is all well and good, but what we're really about is actually hitting those goals, right? So we talked about dreaming. We talked about how do we get to the core of what it is that you want in the first place. And then we talked about organizing, getting organized around those dreams. So we talked about identity statements. We talked about putting them against a time frame. And remember, those are not deadlines. Those are reference points and basically desire points. I would love to have these dreams come to fruition in my life by a certain time frame, right? So if you're here, I'm going to take that to mean that you've watched video number 1, you've watched video number 2, and you've been working through the free PDF workbook simultaneously, because you can listen and you can watch the videos, but if you're not implementing along the way, this isn't going to do you very much good. So if you haven't watched videos 1 or 2, and if you haven't been doing the workbook exercises, I strongly advise that you pause and not continue this video and go back and do those things first. Okay, so the third step in the DocPal goal setting system here in the Grow and Get It Goal Getters Club, that's quite a mouthful, is clarify. So if you turn to page 11 in your workbook, you can follow along with me. Now, in this system, we do use the SMART goal framework to set our goals and start to get crystal clear. This piece is actually really interesting and really important because we're moving from the dream space, the desire space, which can feel very vague and can feel very generalized, and we're crossing that bridge into actual specific strategic areas of goal setting. Okay, so we're moving from the fuzzy into the concrete. It's another way of thinking of it. So on page 11, you'll see what SMART as an acronym stands for. Basically, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I'm first going to walk through each one of those pieces, and then we're going to go through an example to see what this looks like in person or in action. Okay, let's start with the letter S. S is for specific. Now, being very specific about what goals we're actually setting and what goals we're after is very, very important. We want to be crystal clear on what it is we're working toward. Essentially, getting specific helps to identify what's the actual outcome that you're after, and we start to talk about and how are you going to get there? We start to get specific about the tactics. Now, we'll get actually more detailed and more honed in and selective about what those tactics are, essentially the how are we going to get there, a little bit later. But for right now, when you start to take your goals from the dream state, from the desire state, from the kind of fuzzier, generalized state that they're in, into the more concrete version of them, here we can focus really specifically on getting really concrete about what's the outcome that you want, what's the change, what's the desired transformation at the end of this 4-week cycle. Okay, M in SMART stands for measurable. Any kind of numbers, any kind of metrics, any kind of quantitative element that you can bring to your goal setting, bring it. It's going to be much more helpful. And here's a tip that's backed in research and science. We are actually much more likely to achieve our goals and to stay motivated to achieve our goals and stay personally attached to them if we set a range of numbers instead of one specific number. So, for example, if you're looking to start a new habit in your life and you aim to say, I'm going to do this every single day of the week, or maybe 6 days out of 7 days a week, you're actually way more likely to instill that habit if you say, I'm going to do this between 5 and 7 days a week every week instead of 6 days a week or 7 days a week. So if you can, 1, insert numbers and metrics so that we actually can measure when we've hit that outcome, when we've actually crossed the goal line, and give yourself some wiggle room. When we're moving into a goal space, we're moving into a version of us and a version of life that we have yet to live. We haven't done it yet. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a goal. We haven't been that version of us yet. So give yourself a little bit of a cushion to help you get there. We want to give ourselves all the support we can. And one of the ways we can do that is by setting a range of numbers instead of one hard number. Okay, A in SMART stands for Achievable. You may have heard versions of the SMART goal system where A means something else, like attainable or attractive. But for our purposes here, A stands for Achievable. I like to think of this as it's kind of a reality check. So we can be setting these huge, lofty goals and saying, you got to dream big and go for your goals. And we have all these amazing, beautiful, big dreams of who we're going to be and what kind of life we're living and all these kinds of amazing things that we're going to achieve. Achievable, this portion of the system is where we take a look at what's already happening in your life. Where is the space for your efforts to achieve this goal? Where's the space for the other resources that have to come into play for you to hit this goal? It's the reality check of, in the 4 weeks that we have ahead of ourselves, what's actually doable? Because we want big dreams, but we want doable goals. Small steps in the direction of your big dreams are way more valuable and way more effective than trying to take giant leaps at a time. Okay, so in this section, we got to take a look at the non-negotiables in your life. What are the responsibilities that you have? What are the resources that you have? What are the things that are happening already in the next 4 weeks that are going to influence your ability to show up and go after that goal? If you've got a lot going on in the next 4 weeks, or if you have a lot of responsibilities that are maybe more than usual, like let's say you're hosting a birthday party, you're traveling somewhere, maybe your kids need some extra attention these days, we have to factor those in if they're going to be non-negotiables, because otherwise we're going to be setting these big lofty goals with very minimal likelihood of achieving those goals. Or even if we achieve them, we might be, breaking our necks along the way, trying to force it to happen. Don't make this process and this journey harder than it has to be. We want to make it fun. We want to keep going one foot in front of the other instead of trying to take these giant leaps. Okay, this next piece of the SMART goal framework is actually very, very important and often undervalued or overlooked. So R in SMART goals stands for relevant. You can also think of this as R stands for resonant. How am I personally resonant with this particular goal? Essentially, what's your why? You've got to care about the goal. You have to have some kind of personal connection. Otherwise, you're way more likely to lose steam, to lose interest, to lose motivation, and that even if you hit the goal, it's going to be way less fulfilling for you because it wasn't a goal that was really personally meaningful to you in the first place. So, how we can help ourselves with motivation, with increased likelihood of achieving the goal, with making sure that the goal is actually personally moving us in a way that matters in that direction and not just forward in any kind of direction. We want to take a look at this R section. Is this goal relevant to me? Why do I want this change in my life? What is my why here? And also think about why now? At this point, earlier in the previous videos, we talked about selecting goals from all of your dreams of, here are all the things I wish were in my life. Here are all the things I would love to be, to do, to have, to contribute. Why did you choose this goal? Remember, we're only selecting between 1 and 3 goals to work on for the next 4 weeks. We're being very specific and incisive with which ones we're choosing to pursue. So let's make it relevant. Why does this matter to you? And why do you want to do it or pursue this now at this point in your life? T in the SMART goal system stands for time bound. And obviously we need to know, when are we going to complete this by? What's our goal here? Not only what is the outcome, but also by when? We don't want it just open-ended. A lot of times what happens is our brain wants to cushion and guard against the potential for disappointment, the potential for pain, for embarrassment, for frustration. And setting goals requires us to get vulnerable. It requires us to say, okay, I'm drawing a line in the sand, and this is what I'm going for, and this is the specifics of that, and this is by when I'm going to do it. And there's a lot of potential for, quote unquote, failure. And when we set time as a boundary for the outcomes that we're choosing, it ups the ante, right? And so we want to set ourselves up for success. Hustle culture will tell you set big goals, set the deadline, stick to the deadline, and hustle your face off to go get it, right? No, I refuse to accept that, right? I've let that, no thank you. I don't subscribe to that idea and that way of life anymore. So when we set this time-bound piece of the goal, we want to make sure that we're not just trying to turn the heat up for the sake of turning the heat up or for those bragging rights or for, I'm going to go for it. If you want to go for it, and if you love the idea of turning up that heat to help up the pressure and motivate yourself externally to go for something big in a shorter amount of time, go for it. If you actually want a higher quality of life, if you want to be, more authentically you, who's thriving along the journey of hitting the goals, choose a time-bound period that will be supportive of you. I'm not saying within 10 years, I will have finally, sent that email to this person. No, there's a beautiful happy medium in all of that, but we're not saying by tomorrow I will have made, $100,000 and I've made $5 today. There's no reason for that. So what we can do, since the Goal Getters Club works in 4-week cycles, I encourage you to take a look at time-bound being by default 4 weeks. And everything else before that, what you're specifically going after, the measurement, how are you going to measure the fact that you've crossed the line? Is this achievable? And is there personal relevance and resonance in here for me? I encourage you to mold those pieces and keep time bound at 4 weeks. What's achievable for me in 4 weeks? How can I move the needle toward this bigger dream in the space of 4 weeks? So we're not getting fixed to, okay, this specific huge milestone has to be the thing that I accomplish in 4 weeks. It can be a piece. It can be a section on the journey toward that milestone. So I'm not saying that all of your big dreams have to be accomplished in 4-week increments, but increments of our dreams can absolutely have massive progress and significant progress and meaningful progress that actually is tangible and reflective of our growth. A lot of that can happen within 4-week segments. So I encourage you to stick to 4 weeks as your time-bound element in the goal that you're setting, and to mold and play with the rest of these pieces. Obviously, these are your goals. You can set them however you want to, but that's my advice to you. Okay, now for this portion, I'm going to walk you through an example of what applying the SMART goal framework looks like in an actual example goal. So if you look at page 12 of your workbook, you can follow along. I'm going to be reading from here, so I'm not going to be looking directly at you, but I encourage you to have your workbook handy so that you can follow along and take notes. So if your goal is to essentially be conversationally fluent in the Spanish language, that's a desire. The way that I said that, to be conversationally fluent in the Spanish language, it's pretty general, although you might think that's pretty specific, be able to speak Spanish. I know exactly what you want to do. But when it comes to the goal itself over what you're trying to achieve over the next 4 weeks, we got to be way more specific than that. So here's an example of how we can get specific, okay? Remember, we're bringing the general and the more fuzzy version of our dream, our wants, into the concrete form of what we're looking to achieve in a certain time frame. So if we start with S for specific, and we're addressing what's the specific outcome that you're looking to experience, how are you planning on getting to that outcome? Remember, we're looking a little bit at tactics and strategy at this point, but the most important element of this piece of the process is the outcome. What are you looking to achieve? So an example of being specific with that goal would be to be able to have simple, everyday conversations in Spanish by practicing with my Spanish-speaking friends, watching my favorite TV shows and movies in Spanish with English subtitles, and listening to Spanish language podcasts. So essentially speaking with friends, watching TV and movies in Spanish, and listening to podcasts, those are 3 ways. Those are 3 hows, okay? Now you can see that we're actually getting way more specific than I want to know how to speak Spanish, right? The outcome portion that we got really specific around was to be able to have simple, everyday conversations in Spanish. Okay, so actually that's still a little bit like that. What is a simple everyday conversation? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? What are we specifically looking to talk about? How long, etc. So we're starting to get specific. And as we move through the SMART goal process, we're going to get even more specific based on the cues that we've received in the framework. Okay, so that's sufficient for S, the S portion of SMART goals. Now let's move into measurable. How can we make this goal, which is still kind of like a little, not wishy-washy, but a little bit more like puffy. Let's get it more concrete and crystallized, okay? So we can do that by moving into the M portion. M is for measurable, remember. So now we're talking metrics, we're talking numbers, we're talking quantitative elements. And so you might be thinking like speaking Spanish and having, simple everyday conversations. Like how do I take something that's so not quantitative, more qualitative, and make it more numbers focused? How do I measure that? So let's take a swing at it. In the example, we've adjusted the goal to read, the goal is to be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations. There's that range I was talking about. Like we said, a range, anytime we're working with numbers, to be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations in Spanish on the topics of weather, family, hobbies, and travel. So we took the specific piece and we made it even more specific. So we inserted between 5 and 15 minute conversations. So there's the measurable piece. And specifically, we can measure that even more by saying we're going to be talking about weather, we're talking about family, hobbies, and travel. Okay, so that's way more specific than I want to learn how to speak Spanish, right? It goes on. This will be accomplished by practicing with my Spanish-speaking friends, watching my favorite TV shows and movies in Spanish with English subtitles, and listening to Spanish language podcasts. So that piece hasn't changed from the previous version, but we have tinkered with it. We've tweaked some things to make it way more crystal clear so that we, as the people going for this goal, we know exactly what we're shooting for here. Okay? Our goal line here is to be able to have a conversation of a specific length on one or more of these 4 topics. Okay, so now we have a much clearer idea of what we're going for. Okay, A is for achievable. Remember, achievable is the reality check. And I love this piece here. So we got to take a look at, okay, over the next 4 weeks, what's actually reasonable for me to do? Okay, 4 weeks is, in the grand scheme of things, a very short amount of time, but amounts of time doesn't mean that there's no progress that can be had. Oftentimes we can make more progress over a shorter period of time than the progress we expect to make over a longer period of time. So what does this look like in action? If we take the example of learning Spanish and we apply it to the achievable portion of the SMART goal framework, it's going to sound something like this. The goal is to be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations in Spanish on the topics of weather, family, hobbies, and travel. Okay, that hasn't changed. Reality check comes in. What's actually doable for my life for these next 4 weeks? This will be accomplished by practicing Duolingo, which is an app for learning all kinds of different languages, not just Spanish. Practicing Duolingo for 20 minutes a day, numbers. Actually, I just caught this. This could have been between 15 and 20 minutes, actually, to even more increase my chances of doing this and accomplishing this, not just specifically 20. Okay, this will be accomplished by practicing Duolingo for between 10 and 20 minutes a day. You can make a note on your workbook to change that. Watching my favorite Disney movies in Spanish with English subtitles and listening to Spanish language podcasts while I cook. Okay, so let's take a look at what's changed. First of all, we keep the first piece that was adjusted in the previous step, measurable, to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations on the topics of these 4 things. Okay, great. No tweaking needed there. The doing part, the how am I going to get there part, let's take a look at what's actually achievable. So before we said practicing with my friends, watching TV shows and movies in Spanish, and listening to Spanish podcasts. Okay, still super general. Like, okay, what podcasts are you listening to? When are you listening to them? Which Spanish speaking friends are you talking to? Like, have they signed off on this? Is there room in their schedule for this to help you with your goal? And so the achievable part helped really dial all that in. We're tightening up the how in this particular case. So how are we going to get there? What are we going to be doing? What are we going to spend our next 4 weeks in a specific action? So instead of just, I'll talk to my friends, I'll watch these shows and movies, and I'm going to listen to podcasts, we're saying, actually, when I take a look at my life, what's really achievable for me is that I can practice Duolingo on my phone for 10 to 20 minutes a day. Okay? Specific. We're not just talking with random people. Now we've switched gears and we're actually going to use an app for a specific app for a specific amount of time. Okay? I'm going to watch my favorite Disney movies, not just TV shows and movies in general, my favorite Disney movies in Spanish with English subtitles. Now, for me personally, I put this in the example because 1, I love Disney movies, and 2, I've probably seen those movies several times. And so I know what's happening in the movie, I know what's happening in the plot, I know what's happening in the dialogue that's going back and forth. So it's probably going to be easier for me to follow along in Spanish than if it was just any old TV show or movie I've never seen before. That's why I chose this. Again, we want to look for areas where we can set ourselves up for success, for fun as well. I love Disney movies. Let's watch those instead of ones that I don't like or I'm not familiar with. And now we tightened this last piece up by saying listening to Spanish language podcasts while I cook. Now, I know there's a lot of Spanish language podcasts out there. I haven't chosen a particular one. I personally, and this is me speaking in real life, I don't know enough about them to have a favorite one to lock into. But what I will commit to at this point is that while I'm cooking, I'm going to throw on any old Spanish speaking podcast. Now, going forward, because I'm not going to be fluent in 4 weeks, but I will be more conversationally, skilled at the end of 4 weeks if I stick to this plan. And also, personally, I have a background in studying Spanish. I'm not starting from zero. So by the end of those 4 weeks, when it's time to set my next goal to increase my fluency levels, I probably will have a specific podcast that I prefer over others. And at that point, I can insert the name of that podcast, or if there's multiple, in the next version of the goal that I set 4 weeks from now. So it's okay. So you can kind of start to see where is it really important for us to have very specific, very precise language and selections of goals in terms of outcomes and activities to get to those outcomes. And where is it okay to have a little bit of leeway and have a little bit of fuzziness? Okay? So now we're in achievable. We're moving into relevant. Essentially, why do I want this change in my life and why now? So for the relevant piece, we're going to take what we just did for that version of the goal. You can think of this as like we're going through drafts. We're moving through the draft version of this goal to get to the final version. Here's where we start to get really the personal piece of why do I care? Like, why did I choose Spanish? Why do I want to learn a language at all? Like, why does this matter to me? So here's this draft version of the goal, the next version. The goal is to be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations in Spanish on the topics of weather, family, hobbies, and travel. Same. So, this is the why, so I can really be the global citizen I desire to be. Now, before I go any further, or actually I'll finish out because that's the same as the previous piece. This will be accomplished by practicing Duolingo for 10 to 20 minutes a day, watching my favorite Disney movies in Spanish with English subtitles, and listening to my Spanish Spanish language podcasts while I'm cooking. So if we go back to if you go back in your workbook to page 10, the organize piece, this is where I pulled out the identity statement. If you look back at that first example on the table, the dream I'm choosing to work on for the immediate future was to become conversationally fluent in Spanish. the feelings upon fruition. Once I do this, or I'm able to do this, I'm going to feel competent, confident, and proud of myself. The identity statement that I put in this table was that I'm a global citizen. Now, on a personal note, this matters to me because one, I was born here in the States, but my parents are born from different countries. They were born on different continents. So I grew up with family all over the world, traveling a whole lot, having all kinds of cultural influences. And so I do consider myself a global citizen. And for me to now incorporate in who I know myself to be, the ability to speak another language outside of English, that matters to me. That's personally relevant to me. So I was able to include that piece of why does this matter to me into this next draft version of the goal. Why do I want to be doing this? Right? So that I really can be the global citizen I desire to be. This is so I can be the aspirational version of myself. I am currently a global citizen by many metrics and standards, but this takes it up to the next level. Now, what I could also do here, what I also could have done here is answer the question, why now? And why now could be something as simple as I studied Chinese for something like 8, maybe even 10 years of my life. And I've lost a lot of it because I'm not actively practicing it on a regular basis. I've been practicing Spanish on my own using the Duolingo app for probably 3 years now. And I still don't feel confident that I could really make my way around in the way that I want to. I navigated okay when I was in Costa Rica and Nicaragua, but I'm like, no, I've been doing this. The relevance for why now at this point, I've been studying this for so long on my own, just in the background. Now, I don't want this background way of treating this aspect of who I am and what I'm able to do as a global citizen. I don't want to treat it so casually anymore. I want to take this seriously, and I'm ready to really focus my energy on this. Now, that why is essentially because I want to, because I'm tired of treating it like a hobby. And that's good enough because it reminds you of dissatisfaction. It reminds you of like, why do I want to take this seriously now and treat it less casually than I've been treating it? Because there's a sense of like, I really wish I was fluent by now. I've been spending a lot of time like trying to work towards this goal, but I haven't really been prioritizing it. It's taking that sense of like, dissatisfaction, discontentment. And it's when you put it in the goal, it reminds you, why are you doing this? Why are you choosing to listen to Spanish podcasts every time you cook? Why are you choosing to allocate 10 to 15 minutes of your day to Duolingo? Why are you choosing to watch Disney movies in Spanish when you could be using that time to watch other movies or to do other stuff with your time? The why helps you remember that it's worth it because these things that matter to me are important. This is why the relevant piece of this system can be so, this can be the change, the point at which you choose to keep going with a goal and to treat it seriously, or to just kind of slack off and say, I'll get to it tomorrow. It reminds you of why does this matter to you? Okay, and then finally, moving into the last piece of the SMART goal system, the example portion, the time bound, by when will you have completed this goal? So the final version of this example goal is to be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations in Spanish on the topics of weather, family, hobbies, and travel, so I can really be the global citizen I desire to be. This will be accomplished by practicing Duolingo for 10 to 20 minutes a day, watching my favorite Disney movies in Spanish with English subtitles, and listening to Spanish language podcasts while I cook. And let's see. That's so wild because this is not different. Okay, so, that's so weird. Okay, sorry about that. The example is not even there. It's the same. It's the same as the previous one. So what you would have done, and for the next cycle, I'll put out an edited version, an updated version of the workbook. I was like, where is it? As I was reading it, I was like, where's the time bound? So you could simply phrase the time bound portion of this by inserting it in the beginning, at the end of 4 weeks, I will be able to comfortably have like 5 to 15 minute conversations in Spanish, blah, 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 blah. And the rest of it is the same. The time bound piece can come right at the front. It doesn't really matter where it is. That's not so important as long as it's present. Now in the workbook, it's obviously not present. So sorry for that. Many apologies for that. I don't know how that slipped my mind. But you can say something as simple as at the end of 4 weeks or by February 28th or whatever 4 weeks is at the end of that cycle. By February 28th, I will be able to comfortably have 5 to 15 minute conversations, blah, blah, blah. So that's how it works. So go through this SMART goal framework. Go through it methodically, right? We start with specific on purpose and we end with time bound. We're not moving around like, I'm going to start with A and then I'm going to move with S and then I'm going to move to R. No, go in order. Now take your between 1 and 3. You should not be having more than 3 goals at this point. Take the 1, 2, or 3 goals that you've selected from the previous video and move it through this system. Okay? In the Goal Getters Club, the Grow and Get It Goal Getters Club, you get to share those drafts with me. And I can look over them and I can help you tweak them if you have questions, if you want my eyeballs on it. You don't have to do this alone. And there's a reason why community is so helpful, especially with this kind of stuff. This is a way where we can all come together and make sure that the goals that we're setting are the ones that are setting us up for success optimally. Okay? We get to do this together. You don't have to do this alone. All right. So anyway, the Goal Getters Club is brand new. You can't even join right now. I mean, technically you're a member just by watching these videos. I consider you as part of the club. But there will be a way to actually have a dedicated online space to have these conversations. So just stay tuned to more information about that. But for now, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Substack to help, to ask for help around setting your goals and getting really clear. Okay, have fun with this, and I'll see you in video number 4.